Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Motoflight Guy here. This one is going to be a quick little tech tip on how to repair the mode and reset buttons on a first gen Versys 650 motorcycle. So I've got my 2009 Versys 650 here. As you can tell, I've already taken it apart, but what you've got to remove is both side fairing pieces, which are these guys here, okay? Pull both fairings off, and I've got the gauge cluster apart, but I put the base back on to show you. So this is the gauge cluster, will be all one unit, okay? And it sits in some rubberized mounts. I've got the screws loose. You've got 3 studs, and those studs engage in these rubberized mounts, and you can see the screws actually still in them. You got to come up from the back side with a Phillips, and if I can show you, it's real tight. So right through here, that's the head of that screw. They go up into the back of the gauge cluster. It's kind of hard to get up in there. So what I used to achieve that is this low profile ratcheting screwdriver. You can get these at Harbor Freight. They're cheap, like 14 bucks or something like that. That'll get you up in there and bust those Phillips screws loose that go into the back of this. And so once you get the gauge cluster out, it'll be a complete unit. And I've got the screws pulled, but you can see all these little screw holes on the back. Just take every Phillips screw out. You should have that many. I'm not going to count them for you guys, but take all the little Phillips out of the back of it. Once you get that, it does have a rubber gasket because it's weather sealed, so it might take a little bit of effort to get that seal broke loose initially, but the top should come off, and then you should be able to pull the circuit board unit out. So the problem with these things isn't actually a problem with the switch itself. I initially thought that it was going to be a bad momentary switch. It's not. So these actually, if you can see the 4 solder points there, you can't see down in there, but these are a PCB momentary push button switch with tactile feedback, and they're fine. But this little white housing here is an extension barrel, if you will. And it's got this little extension, I'll call it a plunger. And you can see how loose that thing fits down in there. I'm just moving it all over the place. Both of them are that way. You can just move them. What actually depresses, that actually sits on top of the push button switch. And this guy here, you can see the little rubber boot with the little rubber tit. So your actual mode and reset buttons that you push on, that you push that rubber, and that rubber depresses that little extension plunger. Okay. So what's happening is these things have so much play in them, they're getting shoved over to the side like that. They're actually getting bound up, and so when you're up here pushing on your buttons, but the plunger's actually mechanically jammed. So what I'm doing to fix this issue is, you can kind of see up in here in this one already, I'm taking a zip tie, and you'll have to do a little trial and error to see which size of zip tie you need, but just a nylon zip tie, and I'm cutting pieces and I'm shimming all the way around that switch, so I'm taking the play out of it. You can see I've got one right now. My camera will show you. I've got one on the left side and one on the bottom. I'm going to cut another piece and put it on the right hand side and do a little testing and see if that takes all the play out of it. Alright, so what I ended up with, and my camera is not going to want to show you guys, I've got one zip tie on the left, 2 on the right, and 1 on the bottom. Now ideally I would have this shimmed so plunger is dead center. It's just not working out that way, but it's really close to the center, and the main thing is, you can see with my pick, I can't shove it all the way to one side anymore. So I've got little pieces of zip tie, nylon zip tie, all surrounding it, kind of shimming it, forcing that thing down into the center of it. And what you want to make sure of is, my camera will focus, you don't want your zip ties too long. You don't want them sticking up too high past the top of that plunger. But that seems to have taken all the play out of it, and I'll show you the button actually fitted up. So I put it back together and started testing, and I actually still had a couple of issues with this switch, and what I ended up doing was squirting some WD-40 down in here and trying to get it worked down into the top of that switch so I could lubricate the contacts. I think what happened was, over the years I had a little bit of corrosion in those contacts, so I worked a little WD-40 down in there and it ended up fixing the problem. So now I've got 100% repeatability on these switches. The original problem though is the mechanical binding. So before I shimmed that plunger, I couldn't actually feel the switch being depressed, and so you're gonna have to shim this so that this thing never gets in there sideways and gets jammed. And then probably a good idea while you're in there on these older bikes, go ahead and lubricate the contacts with something like WD-40 and depress the switch a bunch of times so that you can work it down in there. Just a good precautionary measure on a switch that old, but it seems to be working good now. And here we are with the thing reassembled, and so you can hear both of them have the clicky tactile feedback, which is what you're looking for. That's what I was missing with this top mode button, is you couldn't feel it depressing the switch down in the bottom. It was just kind of a dead press because that plunger in there was mechanically jammed. So we'll put it back on the bike and make sure it still works. So I got it plugged back into the bike. You hit the key, you want to make sure you didn't mess up your tack, and it's actually going all the way to max and all the way returning back to zero. It is a little bit easy to bump the needle and stuff when you're in there working on it. But now, as you can see, if I can get the glare off, I'm cycling my mode button through clock, odometer, trip A and trip B. So these are already reset, so I can't demonstrate the reset, but we've got good functionality back on that button. So if you're having trouble with the first gen Versys dash and you've lost either one of those buttons, there's your fix. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.